Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Voices of the North as Grassroots in Action presents another podcast. This morning, today, we have in studio Brandon Williams. I want to say good morning to you, sir. Nice to meet you.
Good morning to you as well. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Glad you had the time to come and spend with us this morning. So the first question I have out the gate for you would be, can you please give us some background about yourself? Tell us where you grew up at and what schools you attended.
Yes, for sure. So I like to consider myself a Chicago kid at heart. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, raised there until I was about 10. And then my family moved here. The day is so vivid for my mother because me and my brothers, we were walking home from school, growing up in the projects. You walk together as a unit to school. You walk back home as a unit. And we had got home one day and we were crying to her, panicking. We had saw a dead body on our way home, somebody laying out in the street. And from that day on, she made the commitment to leave that situation and come out here. Luckily, my aunt had moved out here before her and told her, hey, they're a women and children state. They'll support you as a single parent. At the time, there was 4 of us in total, and she moved out here. We lived with my aunt for some time. Then we went into PSP, and then we got a place again. Then my mother couldn't afford rent because they went up on rent. Then we went into the Drake Hotel. Then we found another place that got condemned. And then my family went back into PSP, and I lived with my aunt to go to school. I then went to Harvest Prep up until I went there from 6th grade, 6th to 7th grade. And then I went to Washington Middle School in St. Paul, went back to Harvard, graduated, went to Cristo Rey for high school, and then received a full-ride scholarship to Augsburg University, the first leadership scholarship in the state called Act 6. And then from that, after graduating, I had plans to go to law school, and my plans were cut short because of my LSAT score. I wasn't the best test taker. I maintained pretty much a B in college, a 3.3 average, but I had 6 resumes written. I wrote 4 essays, but they ultimately told me your LSAT score isn't competitive as other people. So at that point, I took a step back, worked for the city attorney, Susan Siegel at the time, and then I met Shonda Smith Baker, who's our senior vice president of Impact. She heard of the work I was doing around criminal justice reform and brought me to the foundation to lead our violence prevention, criminal justice reform work through our Fund for Safe Communities.
From that information there, Brandon, seems like to me, definitely being a product of the community, there were things that you had to overcome during your childhood. And I just want to say congratulations on that progress that you made, even though the trials and tribulations, because I believe that us as being human, we are examples for people, because there are still people, children, youth people that are now checked into a shelter, PSP, as you stated. They're going along and helping them grow. And that for me is like encouragement for a youth to see a person coming from where they are now, to let them know they could come out and have a positive impact on the community. Yes. So I really believe that that is very important. Could you please tell me about what degrees do you already hold?
Yes, so I received my bachelor's from Augsburg in political science with a base in pre-law back in 2019.
Okay. Yes. So you did mention that about going there. Yes. Okay, so could you tell me, was there an event that occurred that you decided you wanted to go to law school, or is this just something built in your fabric that you want to make a change for the community?
Yes, for sure. For me, it was a number of events that I had to realize later in life, but when I was a kid, it was really daunting to grow up and have family members be taken out the house. And for me, it was a sad point. So growing up, we always had an uncle, a cousin, my stepfather. Certain people will have to go in due time, but when you're a kid, you just see sadness. People are sad, someone is gone, you don't have that support. And you felt that as a kid, but I never understood it. Getting older and realizing that these people were falling victim to the system that pretty much preyed on people, that were in this cyclical cycle of going through it, I realized that I was someone that loved deconstructing complex things, then teaching that to people so that they're more aware of their surroundings and what they are victim to. So for me, understanding that getting older, went from wanting to be a doctor to wanting to be a police officer. Then I wanted to be a firefighter. I always wanted to help people, being in the situation that I was in. But it ultimately led to law when I realized that that is a pretty powerful and critical system that's a part of our culture as Black people in this country.
Absolutely. So tell us, what kind of work do you do in the community now?
Yes. So through my job at the Minneapolis Foundation, I have two main roles. One of them is supporting Shonda, our Senior Vice President of Impact, with everything that deals with criminal justice reform, violence prevention, intervention, healing communities, talking about systemic injustice, and pretty much overall reform of the community and the systems that people are subject to. The other part of my role, I am pretty much a program officer for our Fund for Safe Communities, which was started in 2018 after the Parkland shooting. And then the foundation, as well as community, made a double impact into that. And now that fund represents giving money into it by community members, by organizations, by partners, by the foundation, and then giving those exact dollars out into community through different ventures. So managing that fund, I lead our advisory committee, which consists of young adults between the ages of 18 to 35 that have had either direct or indirect experiences with violence, and those experiences pretty much deepen their investments and commitments to reducing that for other people in community, other young people and people that are subject to that. So we advise Shonda on her decisions with grant dollars, with funding, with considering certain partnerships and things. And I pretty much hold those two things in tandem at the foundation.
Okay. So could you tell me about some of the issues that concern you the most that are going on within our communities?
Yes. For me, two things: studying political science, realizing the power to vote is such a critical thing that when people are doing this work and leading this work, it's like a critical point for me. And being on the advisory, we all understand that that's a critical piece in society. My thing, though, is understanding that violence prevention, violence intervention come in many different forms. When you think of the systematic way of handling violence prevention, or the traditional way, it's through statistics. It's how are we reducing crime? How are we reducing recidivism? Pretty much, how do we impact the system using numbers and data? But when you have someone baking pies and delivering them to people who need them, having class sessions, holding healing circles, going into someone's house, impacting their entire family, or you have that coach that don't necessarily have those resources but need funding, and people who have that drive, those things are very important to me. And finding that support for them is just as important, realizing that the traditional sense don't really factor into that. So those two pieces are very critical for me. And obviously youth program services. I was a member of PAL. I played on sports teams growing up. I played at Farview Park with Run and Shoot. Like, for me, it was all about community and coming together and thinking of new ways to address problems that was in the community.
Exactly. So one of the things that now we're talking about community and being a part of the positive change and moving forward. Where do you think we go from here to mobilize the community? What support do you think that they need, like encouragement for people who may not know what is available to them? How do we get them out in the community? How do we get them to come and either work alongside us, or for them to see something, where to click something in them to try to get them to come out and work a gift that they already have?
That's a great question. I really think it starts with conversation. It starts with conversation, and it starts with healing. And that, for me, it comes full circle because when we lived over on DuPont, it was myself, my mother, my brothers, two uncles were living with us, and a few cousins. Our house was raided about twice in the span of 3 years because they saw people coming in and out. It was close to Broadway, so people coming from Broadway, there was foot traffic. And we know that area right in front of Ascension, kind of in that area, was a hot area. Due to that the relationship then that kids, that the parents, that my mother had with law enforcement, certain community strategies, there was a disconnect point. Until you start talking about that, why that was, why laws pretty much support that, why that's possible, why for someone like me who have worked over the summer to gain money, but they took that in terms of it being related to drugs. They took it, I remember it so vividly, but in them situations where you have that relationship, but no one is talking about that, no one is talking about how you move forward, why your opinion is valued, how you can impact that very thing. And now we have kind of no-knock raids being reformed. I believe those are the ways in which we need to be innovative about change and about changing what we see in community, who's subject to this, how are they impacted by it. And then from that, you can then think about programs to develop that. How do you have people organizing around collecting their thoughts and research, like quantifiable, qualitative and quantitative data around like what is happening in community and how do we change these systems?
Okay. Grassroots in action. We mobilize the community. We educate on voting. We do phone banks. We give out information where people can go to the polls to vote. So can you tell me about why do you think it's good for people to get out and vote?
Yes. It's the most powerful piece in a democracy. When we are able to influence the direct people who make these decisions, once you start to realize that and you're able to educate people on that, I think that it becomes much clearer the impact that they have. But if it's almost like if you think of a dampening window or a screen in which people can't see things clearly, for me, that's how I see it sometimes, as my experiences is sometimes what lead to my inaction around voter engagement, things like that. And it's also the relationships too. Like we just know restorative vote was just passed, but before that, people who were involved in the criminal justice system, they didn't even, I think a lot of people, it's common to understand that they don't even have that power, that ability. So I know through some of the work we funded with WILD and MNJRC around From the Box to the Ballot and the work that they were doing, like it's very critical that you educate people on what voting means. How do you engage with people even after voting and hold them accountable, but also how your opinion as a person who pay taxes, who's in community, who's subject to these crimes and laws, how you get to influence and benefit or structure those things as much as you want to by being engaged. It's a very powerful piece of a democracy.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So now I have a very personal question for you.
I'm ready.
And I've got to know the answer. And I'm sure once I ask the listeners, it'll be like, we want to know too. So I read a statement that it said that one of your biggest dreams is to become a Supreme Court justice. Please tell me about that dream.
Yes. For me, I always wanted to have power in a system that mattered, right? Growing up and feeling like powerless at times, being subject to whatever I was around and who I was around, I've always wanted to have some type of influence. Then, as I got into middle school and realized like the Supreme Court and the ways in which they influence and impact laws, for me, my mind was set on like, okay, that's my goal. That's my goal, the top of the top, beyond the president. When you think about how long you can keep that tenure if you're there, it had always been a goal to be that influential and a part of a system that I was always subject to. So since then, throughout high school, throughout college, a lot of people always reminded me that because I would say it during my speeches and to a few friends. But that has always been my goal, and it's still there. I think it's still there. I think the Supreme Court, whether that be at the state or at the federal level, is my goal. But I know now how complex that system is. Before then, it was just, hey, I want to be there. But now it's like, I see what that means to get there, and as systems change, and you don't have like the people from Yale and Harvard being the people considered for this. I want to be that change to say, no, look where I came from, look where I'm going. This is how I got there. This is how you can get there too, whether you see it or not.
Okay. Well, I want you to know that I'll be praying for you to have strength to keep on pursuing your dream, and that it will be possible for that dream to come true for you.
Thank you.
Okay. I also read a statement that you made, and I want to ask you about it. I'm going to need you to give me some meat on this. Okay. So the statement I read was, make your work ethic talk and people will listen. Tell me about that.
Amen. Growing up, not even growing up, when I got to middle school, Larry McKenzie, who was a great mentor of mine and the coach of Holy Angels at the time, and at North, and he now just retired and started a podcast. he always told me people really won't remember what you did, how you did it. They'll always remember how you made them feel. And for me, your work ethic leads to the way in which you make people feel. If you're considerate of them, if you're thoughtful, if you think of them holistically as a person and not just as a product or just a student, or just an athlete that's a part of your team or someone at your job, but you see them as people holistically, that then leads to the way in which you are remembered, your reputation, the way in which you impact systems. For example, Artis, whenever me and Artis talk, it's always relational. Although we have a kind of a relationship in a business sense in terms of, the philanthropy base versus the community-driven base. Whenever we talk, it starts with relation. How your mom doing? Okay, that's good. How are you doing? How's your grandkids doing? How are your kids doing? And I think your work ethic goes towards that because it's really how you show up. How are you communicating? How do people relate to you? And really the way in which you're disciplined around a certain subject to meet those expectations, and really who you want to be in life. So for me, it was always based on that. People will remember how you made them feel, and your work ethic ultimately influenced that.
Okay. Is there any issue that you would like to speak on today that is a black burning desire on your heart that you want to put out for the listeners?
Yes. Burning issue. I think one of the most important things to me is gun violence. Gun violence, when you hear about it, sometimes it's like a tiring thing for someone who's grown up in situations. And for me, the most critical part of my gun violence experience and story was my little brother. Well, he was 15 years old over on Golden Valley Road when we lived over on 24th and Golden Valley. He was shot 8 times. He survived, but being a young black man with dreadlocks in the community outside with other family members in the front of the house, due to the tension that was happening, he fell victim to that without even being involved in it. He was in a band. He volunteered for his church. And for me, seeing that, how someone who is disciplined in a certain area of life still can fall victim to those things, sometimes it's what they're associated with, their environment, what they're around, what people see from them, and how that can lead to the loss of life, the loss of comfortability. He couldn't go to school after that. He had to recover. He's still recovering from social anxiety. That situation and people that fall victim to that is such a powerful piece to me. And now you think about the modification of handguns, the ramifications of that, policy around it. It's a very, very, very critical part of my life and my family and everything that I think criminal justice reform, community safety intervention stands for at this time now. So that's me.
Exactly. That burning desire there, I can get on board with that because I really believe in our community, we have a duty to continue to press forward on gun violence. And that statement when you were saying, like in the beginning, people may get tired of it, but there is no time to be weary right now, especially on that, due to the fact of how the guns have escalated, the ghost gun. You can order this stuff online and put it together. We are bound by the duty to try to protect our community as much as possible because we face a hardship daily, just waking up some of the time, just because the people we are, the color of our skin, the area you're walking in, standing in your front yard. We living in a hard place. So I think that the community needs to stay vigilant, and growing weary is not the time. Okay, so I have arrived at my all-time favorite question. So I would like to know if you could go back to your 10-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself to have courage to move forward?
It would have been hard advice to take, and I always loved hard advice. This is such a great question. It would have been to realize what mattered. Really think about, for me, feelings wasn't something that we talked about. It was, oh, you mad about it? Think about it later. We ain't got time for that. Like, move on. And realizing that when I was so ashamed of being in certain situations, like to be picked up on a school bus in front of a shelter, for me, those situations, I used to have to blow up a mattress, sleeping on my aunt's floor, pretty much all throughout high school, every day, roll it back up. For me, I always felt ashamed to be in them situations. But if I knew that that same work ethic, that still staying disciplined, realizing that I wanted something greater for myself, that I wanted something better for myself, it would have taught me to take advantage of those times and really be in a moment. Like, hey, don't worry about that. Focus on your homework. Don't focus on how people see you, what you can't do, who you're around, or the situation you're in. But think about your future. If I would arrive to that much sooner than probably college, then I feel like I would have then been able to step into my vocation, step into who I was meant to be. But I was always focused on a world. So for me, I would have told my 10-year-old self, this is not forever. You're destined for somewhere else.
That's wonderful. I want to take the time now to thank you again, Brandon, for stopping by our studio today here at Grassroots in Action. The door is always open and you are always welcome to come here.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you in the near future.
I'll be here whenever. Thank
All
you.
right, listeners, we'll close out this podcast for today, but the next podcast is right around the corner.